Okay.
Okay, Vira.
Perfect. Yep. Perfect. So thank you so much, guys. My name is Viral Thakar. I work as a head of research at Dataperformers. And basically today I would like to discuss about a topic called domain adaptation, and particularly we will try to see some application in the field of or in the scenario of how we can learn from the synthetic data. But I think I would like to start from the last discussion when where the Excel and his particular point, and he mentioned that if the content is from different, let's say, scenarios like fashion and other things, you might need to do some customization for any particular model. And I think that's where this particular technique also helps a lot. Basically it allows you to generalize the models across two similar but different kind of problems. And in this presentation I'm not going to discuss about a particular model, but this is more like a general technique which you can apply to any models. At the end we will discuss one specific architecture or one specific model also. So that's going to be there for sure. So So this is how a traditional machine learning problem looks like. Basically, the training cycle contains three building blocks where you have the data, machine learning algorithm, and the objective of the machine learning algorithm is to predict or is to give us a function which does the predictions for us. And basically, then we use that particular function on some new data samples and do some predictions, and that process is called the testing process. And if we discuss about the specific part of the machine learning called supervised machine learning, the idea is very simple. You have a set of data points where you have the input features as well as the vectors or the labels associated with those features. And if we move further and try to just see how any particular problem in supervised setting looks like, it might look like some this, where you have, let's say, a set of images of handwritten digits, and then you have the labels, which is y, and in this particular scenario it's mostly discrete. And if your case is very similar to this, then it becomes a classification problem also. Let's say our machine learning, supervised machine learning approach works perfectly fine and it gives us a classifier which is well trained on our data. Then if we give some new input to the model, it will try to predict some labels as an output. And the question is, let's say if we change slightly the input, what will happen? Because if you look two inputs closely, both of them looks very similar. It's just I changed the color aspect of the inputs. And the question is how it will work or how it will behave in this kind of shift. Even in this case it's very similar or simple, then it should be fine. But if we have, let's say, some more drastic changes in the input data, will the classifier work? If it degrades the performance, how much performance degradation it will happen? So the general idea of or general issue with any supervised machine learning or traditional machine learning approach is basically this: that let's say if you train your model with some sort of data, and then if by any reasons, if some distribution shift or domain shift happens in your data, your model completely fails in those kind of scenarios. And we found this particular problem more interesting because most of the clients at Dataperformers are belongs to manufacturing industry. And it's very hard to make a model which works on different kind of products and which works on different kind of, let's say, productions lines to do the visual inspections. So this particular approach helps us a lot in on that particular ground. So I'll try to make sure that I don't discuss too much maths, but this is just the problem formulation here. So let's assume that we have some instance space from which we grab the input data, and we have some label space. And usually our supervised machine learning problem can be formulated like the data can be formulated like this, where you have the pairs of inputs and the labels. And we assume that our data is basically sampled from this joint distribution across x cross y. And this distribution has mainly two parts. One is the marginal distribution over unlabeled data points. So basically, this marginal distribution allows us to sample the actual images or actual data points from the for the inference. And then there is a conditional distribution which allows us to predict the labels based on the data samples. And the idea of domain is very simple. It's a combination of instance space and the specific distribution which we are working with. And then there is an idea of task, which is basically the conditional distribution. So if we try to put more context here, instead of, let's say, discussing the maths part, it might look something like this. Your instance space has all the possible images of handwritten digits. It might have the black background and white fonts. It might have some random backgrounds and some random colors. And your label space has all those possible digits, which is 0 to 9 in this particular case. When we say marginal distribution, we try to refer some sort of distribution, very specific distribution, using which we are sampling this points or this black and white images. There can be another marginal distribution from which we are sampling, let's say, this another set of images. And what we want is basically these two distributions, which is ds and dt, are very different. And that's the issue of distribution shift or domain shift. So domain adaptation, it's kind of a theory or an approach which allows us to train machine learning models when you have a full distribution or a joint distribution across your input space and the labels, and you have, let's say, marginal distribution of your domain shift or the data points. For simplicity, you can imagine this part as your training data set, and this part is your new testing data or new samples which you are receiving. And what we wish is we want to achieve a function from the machine learning algorithm which gives us lower target domain error. So basically a function which works on this kind of data even though we don't have any labels associated with that particular data set. So that's the essence of the domain adaptation, that you have a labeled data set, you have just samples of some another data set which is very similar to your original data set. How you can train your models so that you end up getting a model which works very well on the target domain or the unlabeled data. And if we move further, so the idea of traditional machine learning setup is pretty simple. It assumes that your both the distributions are similar, and basically it assumes that your marginal distributions are same as well as your task is also same. While the traditional transfer learning approaches assumes that your distributions are totally different, your joint distributions are totally different. And technically, it assumes that your marginal distributions are also different and your tasks are also different. To put this more into perspective, it's very simple. You can consider the scenario of traditional machine learning as your training set is this black set of images and your testing set is also those set of images. And the transfer learning assumes that the images are totally different. So for example, let's say you train with the handwritten digits and then you try to test on the notice board signs or those kind of digits basically. So your training and testing distributions are very different in this kind of scenarios. And basically we have this four cases possibilities in terms of change in the distribution aspect. Either your joint distributions and your tasks are same. So for example, let's say you train with handwritten digits, black and white fonts, and you try to predict the handwritten digits labels. Or your joint distributions are different but your tasks are same. So this particular problem is called transductive transfer learning. So it's a sub part of the transfer learning. One another scenario is you have, let's say, your tasks are different but you don't care about the distribution from which the data is sampled from, and that particular portion is called the inductive transfer learning. And the regular transfer learning assumes that both of them are not same. Mainly we are interested into this zone of the problems where your joint distributions are similar, sorry, your tasks are same but your distributions are different. And there can be two main categories here. One is called the heterogeneous domain adaptation, and another one is called the homogeneous domain adaptation. And the idea is very simple. In heterogeneous, your sample space is also different, and the in homogeneous, it's just the distribution which you are using to sample the data points. Those distributions are pretty different. And just like any machine learning problems, then you can divide the categories into the same standard three categories: supervised, semi-supervised, and unsupervised. So the idea is you don't have any labels of your target domain in the unsupervised kind of problems. And that's the problem we want to mainly discuss today. And in traditional statistics, they call it a covariant shift also. Basically, this is what we want to discuss. And to give more perspective, we can consider one simple scenario. Let's say if you plan to train a model using which tries to predict, let's say, some sort of defaultness of a bank client, like whether a customer will get defaulted at the end of, let's say, this year or not, while paying the loans. And there is a scenario where customer is still trying to pay the loans, but the input features which you are considering, which is, let's say, the profit margin or the number of employees the customer has, those features are changing because of some pandemic or some sort of events like this. So your previously trained model, which was trained with, let's say, some standard or normal conditions, is now totally on a wrong track, or it might start failing in the scenarios, because customer will start paying the loans, but the input features are getting changed in this particular scenario or in this new situation which we all are facing. So in this kind of situations, if your data pipeline or if your training pipeline has some sort of notion of domain adaptation, it always adapts your networks to support the new data or new features which we are getting in. So to simply put, it's the same concept. Just there are two new things here. You have a source domain and you have a target domain. So if I want to relate the problem formulation with the synthetic data, we can assume that we have some 3D models with us, and we try to render the images from those models, and then we use those renderings or those labeled data to train the machine learning models. And we have some, let's say, some real images, but we don't have any labels associated with those real images. And this real images can act as a target domain in our case, and this synthetic images act as a source domain in our case. So that's the problem statement here, and mostly it helps you to save the labeling process time. So you don't need to label the new images or new data sample which came from the, let's say, some change in the distribution position. So in terms of formulation, it stays the same formulation. You use the synthetic data as your training set, along with the images of your real data, but there are no labels associated with those images. Now, if our objective is to decrease the target domain error, uh, if our main objective is to decrease, let's say, the target domain error, it can be formulated with these three particular entities. One is the error of your classifier on the source domain, which is the error on the synthetic data. Then it also depends on the notion of distance between source domain and the target domain, how far both the distributions are. And third, it depends on the labeling function which we use to label, let's say, data from the source domain and the target domain. Usually we don't care much about the labeling function, because it's the process handled by, let's say, humans or any automatic system, and it considers the similar features across the data set. So there won't be usually much difference in the labeling functions. And also we cannot control much the source domain error, because it's the standard error which will happen if even if you don't consider the domain adaptation problems. So it's going to be as it is. You might not be able to change that particular error. But the key thing which we can consider here is the distance between your two different distributions. And the idea is you can measure that particular distance of distributions using different methods like L1 divergence, There is something called H divergence or KL divergence. You can also use maximum mean discrepancy, so MMD. So these are the metrics which we can use to measure how far the two distributions are. And if we try to connect the idea with the learning process of any deep learning model, what we wish to achieve is this particular common feature space, which is basically represents the real data as well as the synthetic data. So we want to train this feature extraction portion such that it allows us to learn this common representation space, which can represent my real images as well as it can represent my synthetic images. And there are some characteristics which we need for this particular representation space. It should be discriminative for the main task. It means that it should be able to classify, let's say my data has airplane, bicycle, cars, and those kind of objects or classes. It should be able to classify those classes as it is, but it should be invariant to the domain change. So if I change the domain, if my sample is coming from, let's say, my source domain, or if it is coming from target domain, it should not differentiate between those two domains. In other words, we can say that this, using this same feature space, if I take any sample and if I try to classify that particular sample into source domain sample or target domain sample, I should not be able to classify it. That's the idea. Like, domain classification should fail and the actual task classification should get succeed. And visually, if we try to see how the feature space looks, it might look something like this. So I'll try to explain what this diagram represents. On the left side, it's the same MNIST data set, but with two different distributions. So blue ones are the black and white images of the MNIST, and the red ones are the colored images of the MNIST data set. And if you train, let's say, a classifier, and if you try to plot the TSNE plot of that particular feature space which we learned, it's able to easily classify, let's say, the blue dots mostly, because it works very well on the data set or the distribution which we trained it with, but it totally fails on the distribution or the data which it didn't train which it didn't use for the training at all. And this is the major issue in the current classification framework. Like, if you consider any traditional machine learning model, you will somehow face this particular issue. And if we use, let's say, some sort of domain adaptation, now on the right side, you can see there are groups of similar numbers for sure, but the red and blue colors are merging more. So it's basically able to merge two domains and then able to classify them for the main digit recognition tasks. So that's the feature space we want to achieve in this particular scenario. And the more, let's say, I did this particular training for very small amount of trials, but the more you optimize, the more you will find that this two domains are getting merged into each other, or we call it as a confusion between two domains. And the better your results will start getting into. And just to give more perspective here, like, there are lots of application which we can think based on this particular concept. For example, let's say it's very easy for insurance company to collect auto insurance data than healthcare insurance or personal insurance, because there are more number of vehicles than, let's say, people, I would say. But it's very hard to train, let's say, or use the same model which you trained to estimate the auto prices and use it on the price estimation of, let's say, healthcare. So with this kind of techniques, without exposing the user data which is sensitive in the healthcare scenario, you can train your models without even labeling the data. Or let's say, if you have some data of COVID from, let's say, countries like India or China, which will be totally different than countries like US and Canada. So how you can transfer the knowledge between two different data or different populations? So in those kind of scenarios, we can use this particular technique. And one last model which I wanted to discuss, which we also use in our day-to-day life. This one is slightly old model, but it's one of the stable model, I would say, in right now in this particular zone. And what it tries to do is basically it adds this layer called gradient reversal layer. which will make sure that whatever gradients we get from the domain classification portion are reversed when we try to do the back propagation of the gradients. So it's more like the adversarial training of the like generated adversarial networks. It's very similar to that. We use the adversarial loss here also. We try to minimize this label prediction loss, and we try to maximize the domain prediction loss. So that's the one idea which you can, I think, incorporate in your any feed forward network architecture which we are using. So that's one of the networks which we can use for this particular application. Any questions or anything?
Thank you so much, Viral. So basically, guys, quick reminder. So if you have a question, please write your question in the Q&A like section. Uh, Panelists, any question, guys? Patrick, I saw you. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm wondering if there's kind of common libraries that you use in day-to-day life, or it's all like homemade.
So we built a library for internal usage for this one. So it's more likely homemade right now. But I think it's very straightforward also in terms of like usage, because you can attach this particular pipeline with any feed forward network, even if it's RNN or CNNs or any other
Mm-hmm.
networks. So that way it gives us that advantage.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Any other question, guys? No. I have a question, Viral.
Sure.
Uh, Viral, in the model where you have like the stage of common feature extraction, can you somehow use those common feature extraction mainly to generate, for example, another set of synthetic data, for example, using like those features that you captured from like in the same time from the synthetic data and the real ones, and you have a sort of better quality synthetic representation, let's say.
Uh, so I would say yes, but we never tried doing it, but for sure we can look into it. But the idea is pretty simple here. It's good for the discriminative task, that's for sure. Like that's proven by the theories also. But I'm not sure whether it's good for the
But
generative task or not.
okay, okay,
And the question is also like whether it will try to generate, let's say, the synthetic version of the data or the real version of the data.
yeah,
So that's also the confusion part here.
yeah, okay, okay, thanks. Any other question, guys? Okay, question from Christian. Can you give some example of domain shifts where this has been used and how well it worked?
Sure. So for example, let's say one of the use case, I'll try to discuss one of the use case which we faced, and that's where we explored more about this particular problem. So we were working on a problem of detecting cracks from the semiconductor ICs. Like when a person is manufacturing, let's say, semiconductor ICs, we need to segment the cracks portion on the ICs. And the issue was there was data, but it was very hard to label that particular data, like segmentation data, and the quantity of data also was very limited. So what we did is I was able to find the data set of cracks on surfaces, and I was able to find a data set of cracks on roads or like yeah, concrete basically. And then we use those data sets to and merge with the unlabeled version of semiconductor IC data sets to generalize the notion of crack, because that notion is similar across different, like use cases. Crack in concrete also looks the same as crack in, let's say, ICs or semiconductor PCs or any surface. So this particular field open up this kind of inspection scenarios for us, where you can generalize the notion of some defects across different categories. So that's good about this.
Perfect. Thanks. Any other question, guys? All right. Thanks, Viral. Thanks so much for this amazing presentation. So Last presentation is from our friends from Zetane. So, Patrick or Mina, who wanna present? Like, who wanna share the slides, basically?
Sure, I'll start, and then probably I'll shift. Mina will take over the slide.
About 30 minutes, guys. We should.
So sorry, so I guess that's on. Yeah, everything should be
Yeah,
fine.
seeing your screen.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much for having us today. It's really nice to be here. For us, the title is "Why Seeing is Believing and Understanding," and maybe it will become more clear as we go. And it's really about navigating inside the neural networks, which have contain a lot of data, a lot of different architectures, and so on. And and what we've seen is that it helps to, and we're hoping that it will help more and more to accelerate discovery and to reduce the guesswork, which is sending your model to train over and over again.
Yeah.
So that's what we're trying to solve, I would say, or improve. So Zetane's is based in Montreal, and we're many people, software developers, data scientists, experts in simulation and 3D rendering. And our 3D rendering, you'll probably see by the, I guess, by the engine when we show you our tools. It's really a 3D space. We use it mostly for 2D, unless we're using meshes and so on. But you'll see there's some 3D aspect in there. So that's why we have people really good in 3D rendering. And our main aim is to be able to have understandable, actionable AI for enterprise. And so for what it means now, so it's to open the black box. I mean, there's different ways to open the black box, but our aim was to really get to the ground truth. Instead of trying to build explainability on top of the neural network, what we decided is like, let's see and access really quickly everything about the neural networks or other algorithms, not only neural networks, but access easily all the data and present it in a way that's convenient and easy to use. So there's no, it's what is inside. So and it's actually a coincidence. It's like today we're releasing a free Zetane viewer, so it's actually felt like that. So it's we worked hard, so I might look a little bit tired. It's normal. That's what happens with the product launch. And yeah, so maybe I'll tell you more about all this. And in a way, when we look back at different tools that came in different domains, microscope, telescope, and brain imaging techniques and machines managed to open a new way to look at the complex systems. And I think my feeling is that having a tool to be able to see inside neural networks will open new ways to interpret the system and make new discoveries. And so what we're really focused on with the tools that we're developing, because we're mostly a software company and we do services, but it's really aimed at building the right tool for helping data scientists and also multiple other stakeholders in AI projects. In this case, we wanted to be visual, quick to access the data, can be used for debugging, optimization, and trust. And in this case, trust is not only the trust of the person developing the neural network, but it's also about trust related to project managers, the clients, and everyone involved in the ML project. Because we're having it visual and accessible, the model makes it really understandable. And I presented that to CEOs that just heard the word AI and after like 5 minutes they understood. Okay, so that's what people will be working on. That's what they'll be building. And in the end, we're realizing is the less we send it to the AWS machine, the better it is for the wallet, and also it's the time. So, sometimes it's really time consuming. So today I'll present the tool first. That's the tool that Mina used mostly, and basically it's going to be mostly like a story of working with UNet for medical images segmentation, and we extracted a few really nice little discoveries, visual discoveries. So I'd say maybe I'll start with a little demo. Um, so so we'll be like so maybe I'll just start the engine and just let me know if you don't see it well. So this is our space, and from there you can load different models. This is the viewer, that's the free viewer, and we can load different models. There's curated models, Zetane files, and there, we can also load other types of files which are called Onyx files, and I'll talk about them later. To build models, yeah, sure.
Patrick, can
Mehdi,
you
yeah.
hold the microphone? I think it's there is sort of friction of the microphone.
Oh, okay.
There is a
Yeah,
lot of, let's say, noise in the background. Perfect. Yeah, just like to make it comfortable for you and for the people. Sorry for that.
yeah. That I'll put the big
Oh,
gear, so
this
that's
is
probably better.
by far better. Okay.
Okay, so yeah, I look good, but all right.
You look
So basically, we have a bunch of
AI
curated
sound.
models.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, Patrick.
So when we open it, there's a series of snapshots, and these are just to quick access and show you a little bit what's happening. So I opened the snapshot. I think it's a torch model that we created. To create this model, we in the Python code we enter a few lines that say import Zetane and then send model to Zetane. So basically, there's one line that does that, and it sends the model. And this gives you access to everything about all the feature maps and every tensors. So in this case, it's a shirt that passes through a conv layer, and then Relu does the cleanup. Relu is really good at removing, like I guess, the excess pixels. And as we go, we can see different other things. And maybe I'll put this here. And we can also access every tensors in the graph. This is a computational graph, and every node is an operator. And as you go, you can the input, which is a tensor, becomes is transformed at each node, and you can access all the tensors at this place. And here we see it's the shape. You can see the shape. You can see the shape displayed visually. You can also see it in different ways, and you can also go down to even the values themselves. So when you look, sometimes you want to get a feel of what the values are, you can even go look. So in this case, every tensor is accessible to the graph, and at some point I've realized that we covered everything that's contained in the network. You can access every tensors, you can have the architecture also. And so yeah, so that's a simple model. And I thought I would maybe show one of the model that Mina created. Um, Here, UNet. Let's see the before. And it's a larger file. I think it's a 300 megabyte. There's a little parsing happening, and then we see the model and can access everything about it. Um, in this case, it was image segmentation. We had the original image, and the predicted mask. You see, there's a few artifacts all around, and the ground truth was supposed to be this. That was state of the art. Mina will tell much more about this. And then maybe I'll just kind of show the first few feature maps. We can also look at if I look at these are the weights, and you have the biases. And when we look at the weights, we can see this distribution really quickly. And maybe I'll go further in this UNet. So it's nice that we can see that it has this kind of very elongated U. And I'll go a little bit further down. There's a few things happening here. But when I go here, there's maybe something you could notice about the image and where the attention of the network is putting attention to. So there's kind of a little bit of red here, a little blue here. And if I look at the tensors themselves, you can see the range is pretty wide. Or the distribution of values is there's a pretty wide range, and that can has something to do with how well the model performs. So I won't say too much more from here because I don't want to remove all Mina's scoops. And yeah, so that's all right. So oops, sorry. All right. So so that's a free viewer. We can download it if you want, and there'll be a series of curated models. There's about 10 of them, so you can start inspecting, and you can basically get to know a different architecture. And there's some vision language. We have less of them. They're harder because they're much larger, but we have a few also. And also there's for Windows and Linux users, you can also open Onyx models from the Onyx Model Zoo. And for people that are not familiar with Onyx models, it's open neural network exchange, and it's a format that allows to export, say, from Keras, PyTorch, or TensorFlow to export to an Onyx format. And after this, you can basically run it into production and so on. These are the people supporting the standard, and it's actually growing really quickly on GitHub, and it's supported mostly, I'd say, by Microsoft and Nvidia and different other IBM, I would say. So they have a pretty good support. So it's a good so that you can load directly. So that we wanted to give that for supporting people. And so the use case, Mina will tell us about 5 insights that was gained by looking at the network, because it's nice to be able to see, but we always get the question, okay, but then what do I gain by this? And there's a few nice little gems, and I'd say we call them like a visual insights. And I guess I will stop sharing, and Mina can take over.
Hi everybody. So as Patrick said, I'm going to talk about how we can learn from visualization, and I divided the aspects into 3 categories: data, network architecture, and tensor inspection. I start with analyzing the data. As we all know, data is very important in deep learning applications, and we should make sure that we are feeding the correct data to the network to get the correct output. And there are several aspects of the data that we need to care about, and we need to care about the shape of the data, the pre-processing that we are doing, and we need to make sure that the network is seeing the correct data. And here is one of the experience that we had, as Patrick discussed a little bit. So we had a model to segment lungs from the X-ray data, X-ray images, and we had the state-of-the-art results. So we were happy with our results, but then we were curious to see inside the network. And when we had the data, and when we had the network and the data visualized, we could observe that there are some strong activations at the corner of the images. And we realized that these are due to the white tag at the top of the images, which was used for hiding the informations from the patients. So we tried removing these white tags and retraining the network. So as you can see, this is the old data and the old network. And we had a quite good DICE score, which is a measure of the performance of the segmentation. But after cleaning the data and retraining the network, we could get rid of those strange activations, and we had a richer histogram. And also we could improve the DICE score in average around 1%. And this is another example where we used the visualization to improve our model. We had a problem of segmentation, some medical data. They were 3D data, and they had a special medical format with some header with some information about all the transformation parameters, coordinate of the data, and voxel size. And when we visualize the data in the Zetane engine, we realized that the data didn't look correct. So this is what we saw, and this is what we expect to see. And we realized that because of this specific format of the data, we need to convert the data to some standard format first and then do the pre-processing instead of doing the pre-processing and then converting the data. The second aspect is the network architecture. So when we are implementing a network, we really want to make sure that all the layers are connected correctly. And like when we write the code for the network, we usually copy and paste the layers. And sometimes if we just forget to change all the parameters and the inputs. And also we want to make sure that all the skip connections, the activation functions, batch normalization, concatenations, all of these things are correct. And we can do it easily by visualization. So you can see a unit here, we can easily see the structure and all the skip connections between decoding and encoding parts. And if we zoom more, and this is an example from a ResNet, we can see all the connections between different layers. We can see the activations functions and the batch normalizations and all the inputs. And if we zoom more, as Patrick discussed, we can have access to all the weights and the range of the data, the shape and the histogram, and the bias, all the filters, all the feature maps and the outputs. So to verify network architecture when we are designing a network, and the usual way could be like just to draw the network on a piece of paper, but by using this tool, we can easily see the network architecture and we can have more confidence in designing the network. And the third and last category that I'm going to talk about is the tensor inspection. So as I mentioned, we can inspect all the feature maps, from all the layers, filters, biases, and inputs and outputs, and different parameters from these tensors. We can analyze all of them. So this is one example from one of our models that we were trying to segment some data, and we didn't have good results. So we after inspecting the network, we realized that the data is not passing through one of the branches of the model, and we had like zero output in this branch. So probably if we didn't have this visualization, we didn't know this problem, or we needed to write some codes to really understand what the problem was. But by this visualization, we could find the problem quite easily. And then we added batch normalization, and we could also add some other activation function, and we could resolve the problem of dead neurons. And the other experience that we had was on the segmentation of breast ultrasound data. We had some patients with weak segmentation. So we should have done some error analysis, but what we did, we realized that the histogram of the last layer before the sigmoid activation function is different when we have a good segmentation compared to when we have a weak segmentation. So when we have a good segmentation, we have a sharp bar we can see like sharp fall in the histogram, like in these two examples. And when we have a weak segmentation, it's a more broad histogram. So based on this observation, we developed a method to threshold the images adaptively, and we could improve the DICE score and the segmentation quite well, especially in weak segmentation images. So this is the ground, just one example. This is the ground truth with the tumor in yellow, and this is before using the adaptive thresholding, and this is after, and you can see the improvement in the DICE score. So I guess Patrick will go through more insights.
Yeah, and I mean those are more like less document. Well, they're well documented, but we don't really have time today. So there's different things. Whether data scientists that basically they realized the distribution was skewed as they went through the network, and so that really told them very gave good insights on what to do next, to normalize or center the distributions. And also, I mean, there's things related to tensor range. Sometimes imagine like you have a very, very high values or very low values in the network. This can probably kind of not erase, but kind of really, you have a bunch of neurons or weights that are doing really well, but then you have those very high values that kind of really disturbs the network. So then there can be things that can be done for that. I've seen models that been from even like well-performing models, and when you look at them, you can see that all the it's like only like 10% of the weights have trained or changed, and all the rest is just the good old initialization weights. And that can be kind of strange because those are weights that are technically unused, and that means that there's probably a problem in the training algorithm. So that's using 10% of your neural network brain in a way. And I mean, you can also see sometimes through the network if the signal is really low, at worst case when the neurons are dead in a way. And then there's times where it's really really high, so you can kind of play with that and get a feel. And what I'm realizing is that there's probably a very interesting link with the type of distribution you get for the tensors at different positions in the network, and as related to the training. I've noticed, like, of course, at the top here, if when you look at uniform distribution, and the more it trains, the more it starts making like a normal distribution. And there's also other types of distribution that could be related to other types of problems. And so all this, it feels like there's almost like a dictionary of like, did my network, this type of network train? Yes, I can look at the distribution as it evolves. And we see the distribution change along the network. Sometimes it shifts from right to left. There's a little oscillation, and also it changes through epochs as you train. So it's kind of because we're using this tool and we're kind of starting to discover these things. I'm thinking that there's a lot of other insights out there, and it's just a matter of finding them and trying to see what's happening in the architecture. So now that we can see, I think there's a lot that can come out. And for visual artifact, if you go back, I mean, not just sometimes there's things that and this one I still cannot explain. You see at the top, there's a little a blue square with a very high point there. This one appears in some models, and honestly, I have no idea why it does that. It's like almost like a focus, like a lens, and it just happens. It's kind of irrelevant. It gets deleted, but during the processing, it seems those are really high values, and I think it's queuing the network. But it's like almost like a lens, so it's like a lens effect. I don't know what it is. So that's really interesting. There's things to look more deeply in there. And this, so just for the Python people, I would say what you usually do is you import Zetane, you start the context, which is starting the engine. And that's not for the viewer part. That's I think we have a 30-day trial version. So to be able to connect your Python to create your own models and inspect them, and then depending on your framework, which is Onyx, Keras, or PyTorch, you can send your input in your model. And the update call is a call you can put in just for inference or during the training loop. So you can put it wherever you want in your code. So this is nice because sometimes you can say every 2 epoch or every epoch, let's refresh the network. We do it sometime every batch, but that's kind of it kind of moves really quickly for small models. Or you can say I'm going to do five updates of 5 different inference, so I can see for 10, I don't know, 5 different outliers. So there's different options of input you can do. Yeah. And yeah, so I guess that's pretty much it, and we're really happy to hear your questions and answer them. Thanks.
So much. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Mina. Any question, guys?
I have a small question.
Go ahead.
So, are you guys planning, like, does it support right now any model pruning or those kind of techniques, or whether you are planning to add them in the features or something?
I'd say at the moment it's we're focusing so the would I would say the pruning would probably happen on the Python side, but it's just a matter if you can start, because it's we made it really flexible that you decide where you put your call to show it. So if you start with your model, then you do some pruning, then you show what happens after. So I would say instead of being in the dark, you start your pruning, then you show a different moment of first step, second step, third step, so you could see them in a row. And you can also save the model at that time and create a file that you can go inspect later. So if you send it to the cloud, you would with the engine, you would basically you would save every say epoch or like pruning epoch. You would save a file, and then after this, you just go look at your file and inspect them to see if you were on the right track or it pruned too much at this moment. So that's how we go. So whether you're pruning or doing different other things, we're trying to that's the tool we're want to push. To make it automatic, of course, we would need to get good libraries, and that's integration. We integrated many XAI libraries, like whether it's GradCam, um, Lime, and so on. They're integrated in other versions so that you write one line and then the whole like XAI appears, and we support these also. But yeah, pruning is we're looking into it.
Perfect. Any other question, guys? Any question in the Q&A section here? Okay. One last call regarding the questions. We have comments. We have like impressive, very useful. I see my colleague Ali saying that. So, all right. So if there is no question, thank you very much, guys, like for the presentation. It's very impressive. I really like the solution, and then I clearly see like how it's useful, especially like to inspecting like the models once you design it, especially like for the deep learning ones. Uh, Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Viral. Thanks, Axel, for being late. I think no, it's a little bit late in France. So yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks like for
Yeah.
all the attendees here. This webinar, it's the first time, by the way, again for the Deep Learning Montreal that we do that online. Very interesting. So it's recorded. Probably like I will publish it like in the Deep Learning page too. So keep in touch.
Well, thank
We
you so
are
much for having us. It's it went, I think it went super well. So yeah,
thanks.
perfect organization.
Thank you so much. Like it's the first time, but I'm really happy, honestly. And by the way, guys, we are trying to organize it more often. Remember, like long time, it was a little bit challenge because of the availability of the rooms and all. We are sometimes 320% like in Autodesk or Google like space, so it's now online it's easier. So every 3 weeks I try, and we try, by the way, like to organize it like more often. Probably like last week of January we have another section of deep learning Montreal, but mainly related to operational AI, which is like mainly applied AI like use cases from different like organization and labs. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. And see you in January. Happy holidays, everybody.
Yeah,
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Happy
thank
holidays.
you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye bye.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Mehdi.
you. Bye-bye.
Here.